What's going on, guys? This is week number 4 for book reviews, and I kind of relabeled these little video talks. We're going to go with Dispersing the Cloud. If you guys watched last week, I think it was last week or the week before, I told you about the story of me and my buddy Joey talking about the cloud that kind of fogs up your brain and doesn't let you get your words out correctly. When I was getting my master's degree, I felt like I was really fluid, really on top of my game. I could talk about any topic, and I could talk about it quickly without really having to sit down and think too hard about what I wanted to put together as far as my words. And then after I stopped reading, after I stopped learning, after I stopped growing, after a certain amount of time, this cloud came in and just kind of suffocates your brain. This is week number 4. My goal has been reading a book a week. I think I'm on book number 9 right now, and I feel like the cloud is gone. So that's what we're renaming these little book reviews. They're going to be called Dispersing the Cloud for that reason. We're going to be reviewing the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel today. Sorry, Peter Thiel. You got to let him know he's saying his name wrong because it's TH, but he says it Thiel. So I don't know if he knows that or not. Recap of my week first before we jump into it. I got a new website coming up. We're updating Fragoza.me, so that should be done in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I don't want to put any pressure on my web designer, so 4 weeks. We'll give him 4 weeks to finish that one. We got new logos coming out for Fragoza Media and Entertainment, company I started at the beginning of this year. YouTube, all the videos that I'm posting as far as reviews are going to be on YouTube for kind of like rewatching, and I'm going to put some links in there to the books that I'm reviewing, some other stuff for you guys. And then this last week I spent 9 hours in Apple updating the computer for my brother, which sucked but gave me a lot of time to actually go over 0 to 1 and dig into some, like, this is probably the best review I've done out of all the books that I've reviewed this year. So I'm super pumped. As far as 2 things, process, like I said, the cloud is gone. I've noticed a couple things in the last week that I didn't notice the first 3 weeks. As I am intaking these books constantly, right? So 9 books in 4 weeks. It has been a ridiculous amount of information, but I find fluidity in a lot of the concepts and ideas in the books, and in my own thinking. Like, I'm actually starting to link concepts together from all these different books that I wouldn't have been able to link if I wasn't reading them all in succession, if that makes any succession, if that makes any sense. So that's been really, really cool. The second thing is one of those ideas that I've noticed from all of these different successful people that are talking, that are writing these books, is that it's all about you. Meaning, this is one of the quotes from the book, you are the catalyst for change. It's you. It has nothing to do with all of your exterior things that are going on. And the reason I bring that up is because right now we have 2 drastically different views on politics. And I'm not going to get into politics, but because we have those 2 drastic different views, we have this idea that one side is right and one side is wrong, and we can't be successful without having a particular side win. And I'll get into more of that in a podcast that I'm starting with my buddy Dan Rios called Socially Challenged. We're going to do political stuff. But this is all about you, meaning Grant Cardone says if you are waiting for a certain president or a certain political party to be in power for you to be successful, you're going to be waiting for an eternity. It's never going to happen for you because it's all about you. Ralph Emerson, which is... he basically says, shallow men believe in luck. They believe in circumstance. Strong men believe in cause and effect. This is the first guy to make it to the South Pole, right? When everybody told him that he can't do it, it's not gonna happen. I take that back. That's Ralph Emerson. Ronald Amerston is the first person to make it to the South Pole, and he said, victory awaits him who has everything in order. And that goes back to one of my favorite quotes, Atman Victoria Curum, victory loves preparation. And so it's just a common theme through all the books that I've been reading. And I'll talk about common theme later on through some of the other stuff from 0 to 1. But it's one of the things that I got out of the process of what I'm doing 4 weeks in, I didn't notice this 1 week in. I didn't notice this 2 weeks in, but I noticed it 4 weeks in, that all these successful people are saying the exact same thing in a different way. It's all about you. And that's just one of the common themes. So upcoming next week for me, I got a trip to LA. We're going to be recording at a studio down there. Still working on the album. We're still shooting for the beginning of April. And I have a couple books that are going to be published here on Amazon. We're not going to do hard copy. We're going to go straight to Amazon and do some e-copies of some books. And I'm hopefully going to work with a couple friends that do art on that. So I'll have some different artists on these children's books. I talked a little bit about the podcast, Socially Challenged with Dan Rios. We're going to be launching that podcast at the end of this month, where we're going to talk about politics. And so that's one of my favorite topics, so I decided to make a separate podcast just for politics. It's going to be once a month, Socially Challenged, and look for that on my Facebook page. Book of the week, 0 to 1. This is by far the best book I've read in probably 2 years. And again, I say read. Guys, I'm dyslexic. You need to be listening to audiobooks. I'll probably read maybe only 4 or 5 books this year as a whole, but I'm going to listen to over probably 100 books this year. So listen, read, however you're going to intake books. But this book was called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. And this thing blew my mind. This was one of just an amazing book. Again, it's all about you, but his argument is, he starts the book like this. Ask yourself a question. What is something that you believe that nobody else believes? That's where big ideas come from. So I'm not talking about like, oh, I believe, like, go back to politics. Oh, I believe that abortion is right. Well, I believe that abortion is wrong. No. He's not talking about where 50% and 50%. He's talking about truths that people like literally believe, like gravity is undeniable. We will never be able to float. He's like, no, I believe that we will. Like, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying that's what big ideas are. So he's trying to get you past the concept of big ideas. This actually dove me into, I got into Ted Kaczynski. He mentioned Ted Kaczynski and his manifesto in the book, and he actually references it quite a bit. This was really interesting because Ted Kaczynski, he had an argument. His argument was that people do things with 3 different levels of effort. There are things that we do in our life that require no effort. Going to the bathroom, that requires no effort. We just do it. Breathing, it just happens. There are things that we do in our life that require a lot of effort. It's really hard to do, but they're doable. And then there's things that are just impossible, like, go back to gravity, like flying without any help, right? I'm just going to hover. It's impossible. Why waste any time on trying to do it? So Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, for those of you who don't know that is, he said that because of technology, the way that our lives are going, that the middle section, things that are really, really hard to do but are doable, get less and less and less. So if you think of like a primal state, when we were hunting and gathering for our food, that was very, very difficult, but doable. It gave us purpose, right? What do we have to do to get food now? Go to McDonald's. Done. No purpose. Part of the reason he was bombing things is because he wanted to bring us back to a point of needing or having purpose to do very, very difficult things. He said humanity won't survive, right? So that was his thought. And this was, you know what, I apologize, I don't have the year, but he's describing 2017. We have mass numbers of people who are depressed, angry, don't have purpose, uninformed, uneducated, and you're just like, whoa, like that's describing a lot of like 2017. Maybe Ted was onto something here. Now his solution to the problem was a horrible one, bomb everything. That's ridiculous. But I feel like extremely smart people like that are looking at the world from big picture, big idea standpoint, and they get panicked because they're so frightened about what they see that the only thing they can think of is to destroy it, to save it. So that's the power process. And let's see what I wrote here. Power process is the process of satisfying the desires of the second group. Like I said, it's the second group. And when we don't, right? We're more influenced to depression, anger, etc. So big ideas, they're not accepted anymore because we have technology. If you guys know who John Reber is, this is an example of big ideas. John Reber was the guy who wanted to change the San Francisco Bay. He wanted to put a couple dams in. He wanted to make, I think, 4 or 5 different lakes up by San Francisco Bay, right? Basically dam everything up and solve our drinking water problem. He wasn't an engineer, right? He was a teacher. I believe he taught at Stanford. And so he made up these plans. He got pretty far. He even got Congress to sit down and talk about it. You think about where we're at today with big ideas. A school teacher from Stanford probably wouldn't be able to get as far as he did now because Congress wouldn't listen to a school teacher from Stanford who wasn't an engineer on how to engineer things, because we're further along that power process that I just talked about earlier. So the big idea isn't needed anymore. Another thing that Peter brings up in this book is that education, the way the education system is basically designed, is it is designed shallow and wide, right? So you think about all the classes that you took in high school. I took English, I took history, I took art, I took wood shop, I took Spanish, I took physics, I took science, I took math. Shallow, wide. Am I an expert at all of those? No, I'm an expert at none of those, right? So keep that same concept, and then we're going to jump over to investors. So like they call them VCs or venture capitalists. And the idea of 20-80, the 80-20 rule. This is a concept that Peter says exists in nature. So he tells a story of a man who had a pea garden, and 20% of his crop gained him 80% of his yield, right? And it carries over into a lot of different things like venture capitalists. They say that 20% of their investments bring them 80% of their yield, right? And so it goes over from the nature side over to actual money, which is kind of interesting. And then he makes the argument that if we would apply that to ourselves, right, 20% of our time needs to be spent, right, on and it really is for business. 20% of our time is spent on 80% of our growth, right? Because we got things that we have to do, like answer emails, that take up a lot of our time, but that's not really the creative thing that makes our businesses run, right? Or my creative thing that makes my business run is my music. I'd argue that I spend 10% of my time on creating music and 90% of my time on marketing and doing blogs like this and trying to get the word out of who I am and what I'm doing. But it's 10%. So his argument with our schooling, back to the schooling, is why are we spending all of our time going wide when at a very early age we know that what we love and what we're interested in? If we know what we love and what we're interested in, why do we do 20-80, right? And only put 20% of our time into 80% of what's being created, when every venture capitalist, right, that he talks to said if they knew the formula for success, they wouldn't put 20% of their money in the good investments. They're gambling, really. They don't know how it works. They'd put 100% of their money into whatever is working. So if you take that same concept and move it over to our education, is if you find something you love, if you guys watch TED Talks, you can go back to the TED Talk with a girl. The TED Talk is called Education Kills Creativity. It's about this little girl who couldn't sit still in class, right? And so she was going to get kicked out of class, and her parents got brought in, and the principal put the radio on. The parents left the room. The principal left the room. They watched the little girl sit there. She's all antsy. But he put the radio on before he left the room. She gets up and she starts dancing and looks at the mom and says, "Don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your daughter. She's just a dancer. Put her in dance class. Everything will be fine in school." All right, this is 65 years ago. Actually, it's only about 45 years ago, because I believe she's still alive and she's a Broadway producer now, making millions of dollars. But the point is, she took 100% and put it into dancing after that once she knew it was okay. But education would tell you, no, you can't make money dancing. That's not for everybody. You can't make money doing music. That's not for everybody. You can't make money writing books. That's not for everybody. You know, what do you love to do? You can't make money sewing. That's not for, that's not for everybody, really. But if you knew you loved to sew and create when you were 7 years old, and that's all you ever did, by the time you were 18, I'm sure you'd be doing just fine with your own clothing line. The point is, when we take education and we spread it, and this is, again, Peter Thiel's point, when we spread education far and wide, we are spending time on things that we are never going to use. Henry Ford got brought into court, actually, because this is a book, I think last year I read this book. But this story has been told a couple times in these common theme books. Henry Ford gets brought into court, and he's being sued because they say that he's incompetent. And so his argument to that is, hey, I can afford, there's a little button machine here at my desk, and I can afford to hit a button and have any number of experts come and tell me the answer to any question I need. So why fill my head with trivial things that have nothing to do with my business? I'm not incompetent. I'm not spending time. Cloud just got me. See how I froze? The cloud. We're trying to disperse the cloud. I'm not going to spend time or waste time on learning all this stuff that doesn't apply to Ford Motor Company. So if we take that same approach to education, what would education look like? What would our big ideas look like? So that was a super cool concept to me. And then the other thing that he brings up is in business, same thing. Grant Cardone says this all the time. You don't want to compete. He says, you don't want to compete, man. You don't want to compete. You want to dominate. You want to dominate your field. Every business wants to dominate. You want a monopoly. Losers compete. Winners dominate. That's Grant Cardone again. If we knew the 20%, right, that's where we'd put all of our money. So some of these people who figure out where their 20% is, like Peter Thiel, he's the co-founder of PayPal. He's one of those guys who's already done it. He's actually, they said the 6 founders of PayPal have gone on to create 6 other million and billion-dollar companies after PayPal, after they sold PayPal. All 6 of them. All 6 of them have done it separately. Peter Thiel's one, and then the Tesla dude. I'm drawing a blank on him. The cloud's got me on that one. Zuckerberg. He's one of the founders of PayPal as well. And there's 5 others who have gone on to make billion-dollar companies. But it's because they know where the 20% is. They're not wasting their time on other things. They know where the 20% is. This was let's see, what do we got next? We got monopolies. All these companies, they are monopolies. They try really hard not to be seen as monopolies. He said one of the things you can tell about a huge company will try to convince you they're not a monopoly. A small player, a poser, will try to convince you he is. You ever talk to a company that's local and they're like, oh, no one does what we do. We dominate. No one can give you what we can give. They're trying to tell you that they're a monopoly. We got a niche in the market. No one does it like we do it. They're trying to tell you they're a monopoly. That's how you know they're not a big player. The monopolies are the guys who are like, we have a lot of competition. They're the Googles that sit there and say, Google's really competing right now. They have a lot of competition like Yahoo and Bing. It's really hard for Google to compete. We know it's not hard for Google to compete. They own everything. But they spend a lot of money and a lot of dollars and a lot of court cases trying to convince us that they are competing. That was super fascinating for me. Let's see. Microsoft plays. Okay, so this is back to Simon Sinek. I'm saying his name right now. Give me 1 second, guys. Let me find. I'll cut and splice it when this goes on to YouTube, but I want to make sure I got my notes right here. Players play to beat the competition, but and that's Simon Sinek. He's saying the same thing. Again, this is just a note back to it's the same people or it's different people saying the exact same thing. So we got Grant Cardone, who's a sales guy. We got Peter Thiel, who is a tech guy. and we got Simon Sinek, who's Sinek, who is a social science guy, and they're all saying the same thing. All of them. Build a team. This book had a lot of emphasis on you building your team and making sure that the team that you have, they all have the same vision, which really blew me away because, again, Simon Sinek, he was not made famous, but his notoriety comes from a book called Start With Why. So he's saying the exact same thing. I read a second book. We're gonna jump a little bit on the second book later, but I read a second book by John Maxwell called How Successful People Think, and he starts the book with the quote, a man who can work will always have a job. A man who knows why he works will always be his boss. Start with why. Your purpose, your why. If you don't have, again, with the education thing, we spend a lot of time going far or going shallow and wide, but if you already know your why, if you start with your why, all the other little stuff doesn't matter. We make that mistake in our business. We say, oh man, I gotta find something that I love and figure out how to, or something that I love that can make money. That's what I got to do. To really be happy, I got to find something that I love that can make money. No. To be happy, you have to find your passion, right? Whatever it is, whatever you will do for free, find it, do it, and then figure out how to monetize it. That's how you find true happiness, because everything else won't be fulfilling. It doesn't have to be super, super specific. I can't say, I love playing coffee shop music. Let's find out how to make money. No, I love telling stories, right? Let's go a little broader. I love telling stories. So let's find out how to do that. I'm never going to be sad with my job. I'm going to do this for free no matter what. The fact that I'm getting paid for it's awesome. So Peter Thiel was very adamant about that. Simon Sinek is adamant about that. Grant Cardone is adamant about that. John Maxwell is adamant about that. They're all saying the same thing. Even my guy, Malcolm Gladwell. I love Malcolm Gladwell. He gets knocked a little bit in this book by Peter Thiel, or Thiel. But Malcolm Gladwell says the same thing. These guys who are successful, they found something that they love and they're passionate about. They spent 10,000 hours on it. Education, you're not going to get 10,000 hours going to high school and going to college on the thing that you love. That's where we're messing up education-wise. That would be Peter Thiel's argument for why we're messing up education. If you need 10,000 hours to be a master at something, then how are you going to get that if you're spending all your time in school and killing your creativity, according to the most famous TED Talk, Education Kills Creativity. So I'm going to jump pace from 0 to 1. Amazing book. I got to make a new 5-star rating because that was like 6 stars. So we'll call that a 6-star rating. It doesn't get to hold its 6 stars. It loses it after a month. But you get the 6-star when you explode my brain and I have to mold it back together. Peter Thiel's book, unbelievable. I followed it up with John Maxwell, How Successful People Think. It's more the same. It was just more the same. He's talking about all the same things that I've been talking about in the last 3 weeks. Making sure that you are making schedules and making sure that you're spending your time wisely, making sure you're surrounding yourself with the same people. One of the great quotes I got from him was, unpopular thinking creates the seeds of innovation. It's on my Twitter. If you guys go to my Twitter, you'll see the quote from him. But it's just really, really good stuff. Those who don't reflect, it's impossible to... If you don't reflect, it's impossible to see change. Again, you guys check my Twitter. I'm always tweeting out all these quotes as they come. I don't have them all written down. But John Maxwell, great book. Let me go back to my notes real quick and make sure I don't have anything else for you guys. I know this one was a little bit longer, but I really got into 0 to 1. Next week, the book is The Art of Learning. I added this one to my list when I saw Uriah Faber recommend it on his Snapchat or his Instagram. So I'm pumped to do that one. Thanks for putting out that one, Faber. And that is by John Waitskin. He is if you ever saw the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, he's that kid. He's the prodigy chess player. He's not Bobby Fischer. He's the guy who's the next one. So it's a lot about his story and how he approaches learning. I'm already about 4 chapters in. It's pretty good. It's pretty phenomenal. Coming up next month in February, I have a show February 2nd at Vine and Branches in Lodi. If you guys want more information on that, check out my Instagram page. And then February 3rd, I'll be in LA recording, which is pretty awesome for me because that means I get to go visit my old church, OCC. So anyone from OCC watching, I will be there on Sunday. So I'm pretty, not this Sunday, the following Sunday. I'm pretty pumped. And I have one wedding. I got my first wedding of the season. And I do about 10, 12 weddings a year. So I'm pumped for my first wedding. A little bit of words of inspiration before we take off for your weekend. 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you do, by the things that you don't do. We're going to start over. I got to give Mark Twain some credit. 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you don't do than by the things that you do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. Mark Twain, he's the man. That's the inspiration stuff for the day. I got to kick it back to John Eldridge, though. No good sailor was made in the safe harbor. Get out there, guys. I'll see you next week.